Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I am so excited for this episode, but before I get into the trailer and telling you what it's all about, I just have a quick announcement. I am deciding to take the rest of the summer off from podcasting, and this is for several different reasons. I don't know if you guys' families are anything like our families, but the summer tends to be a whirlwind. It's so busy, it's so chaotic. If you have been following me on social media, you will know that we have been battling some colds and some sicknesses, and to be honest, I just haven't had any time to pour myself into some of these creative projects that I have going on. So there are all sorts of different reasons. I will be back in the fall podcasting, but I just decided to take a little step away. And I've said this story before, but I think it's worth repeating. I think that every time we do something that prioritizes ourselves, we empower others to do so as well. I will never forget the time that I had a coach say, I can't show up because I need to take care of myself. And that was such an empowering moment for me, because we tend to think that showing up, even if we're frantic and, chaotic and not our best selves, is better than not showing up at all. And the truth is that sometimes it is better to take a break. And so I am doing that for you. I hope that me doing this in some way empowers you to either say no, or to pause when you need to pause, or to take that break where you have felt like you needed to in some aspect of your life. Even, of course, if it's not podcasting like me, maybe it's something else. So today, I am talking about the second ego story. If you don't know, I have 3 that I've identified so far. It could be more, but today I'm talking about the second ego story. And if you remember, the ego is this part of ourselves that we see as separate. And so this story tells us that we need to look to the external world for validation, that we need to look to the external world for answers, and that we fall into several different patterns of behavior that include either perfectionism, comparison, needing approval or validation, getting self-conscious or self-conscientious, seeking advice or looking for answers, and making attachments to things that bring us comfort that maybe aren't, the best things for us. So I cover all of those things in detail in the episode. I hope you guys really enjoy this episode. And again, thank you if you have been on this journey with me. Thank you for joining me every other week when I release episodes, and I will see you guys in the fall. Welcome to the Get Out of Your Head podcast, where we talk all about the stories that keep you stuck, blocked from manifesting what you really want, and away from your authentic life. I am your host, Sarah, from Spirit, Mind, Body. Hello, everyone, and welcome back wherever this episode finds you. I hope that you are doing well, that you are happy and healthy, and you're having an awesome day. Today, I am talking about the second ego story, and that is that the ego looks to the external world for either validation or for answers. So last time, I kind of just discussed how I came to the realization that we have these quote unquote ego stories, and they come from our basically physical existence. We have this energetic and this physical component. And so when we inhabit our physical bodies, it creates this separation that sort of makes us self-conscious. It makes us look to other people. It puts us in comparison cycles, or making us feel like we're inadequate or not enough because we're not like someone else. And it's not the truth. We are spiritual, we're expansive, we are energetic, we are completely connected at the heart of it, but the ego keeps us separate. And so this is the ego story that further expands upon that idea. So this one is that, like I said, the ego looks to the external world for validation. So a couple of identifying features of this story is that the ego can only imitate. It doesn't create. The ego looks to the external world and says, okay, what is that person doing? And then how do I do that? How do I recreate that? The spirit is extremely creative. There is no way for the spirit to not be creative. The ego doesn't create, the spirit creates. So that's a big reason why the ego only looks to the external world for validation, because it's trying to imitate that. The other thing is that when we get caught in this cycle of comparison, the ego tends to compare our path with somebody else's path. And the spirit knows that there is a unique path for everybody. My path shouldn't look like anybody else, but my ego gets in the way and says, oh, but you don't have what she has, or you're not doing what she's doing, and compares measures of success through external things like money or status instead of the internal things like happiness. Another thing that the ego does in this version of the story, and I'm going to unpack all these things in just a minute, but it needs things from others. It's looking for affirmation. It's looking for that praise and approval from other people. And then what happens is that the ego starts to play small. It starts to not allow the full extension of ourselves to be shown, because we get self-conscious, because again, we're caught in that comparison cycle. And then when we are in that state of discomfort, comparing ourselves, telling ourselves that we're not enough in comparison to somebody else, then we end up relying on attachments or things external to us that make us feel better in the moment, instead of just being, hey, I'm good, I'm okay, I'm enough, I am worthy. All of these things that are true to our spirit, but our egos get in the way and tell us that we're not all of that stuff. So, like I said, I'm going to unpack all of that stuff, and there may be bleed over. And I said this, like, I have 3 main ego stories that I think, they're almost like patterns of thought, but they're not hard and fast, 100%. This is how it has to be. They're just categorizations because that helps our brain put information where it needs to go. But there is bleed over. One comparison can bleed over into one line of thinking very easily, thinking that because that person's doing something, I have to do it too. There's only one right way. It all bleeds in together. So before I get into this and unpack how this story shows up in our lives, I just want to take a minute and talk about like where this kind of comes from. So I've talked about this before, I think in my first episode, about how when we're younger, we learn everything from our environment. We're like little sponges. We figure out the way the world works. We figure out customs and norms and courtesies and how to say please and thank you and how not to hit the people around us. We learn how to get along with others, and that helps us fit in. And that's evolutionarily a good thing, because if you don't fit in, if you go back to the caveman days, if you don't fit in, you don't get fed, you don't eat, and you don't survive. And so it's very, very beneficial for us to fit in, and our brains are hardwired in order to take in our environment when we're younger and then adapt to that and become a certain way that would gain the approval of others. So quite literally, from the time that we were born, we are taking in the external world, and we're molding ourselves in order to fit in with that external world, in order to be accepted and, of course, survive. So the habit of looking to the external world is so deeply embedded in us that we don't even realize that we're doing it. We look to the external world all the time because that's the natural state that we have been in for so long. And it takes coming out of that and really owning ourselves. And I would say even like an act of courage to come out of that and say, I'm going to go against the grain here. I'm going to not be like that because that's not authentic to me. But again, like I said, we don't even realize that we're doing it. And so the whole purpose of me taking an episode and talking about this topic is so that you can start to recognize like, oh, this is a pattern. This is where this shows up for me. This is how I tend to look to the external world. Or when I start doing this, that's me, that's just my ego. Because if you're not aware of it, of course, you cannot change it. You can't make it conscious. And the whole point to all of this stuff is to make things conscious so that we have a choice. And my message, as with everything, is of course that there is a middle way, to find that middle way, to find what works for you. I'm saying that if you take it all the way one way, it can be detrimental. However, if you come to the middle ground, you can make it work for you. And that's the whole point of this. So, here are some ways that this story might show up for you in your life. Okay, the first thing is perfection. I did an entire episode on this, and I will link it in the show notes below. I highly recommend you check it out if you haven't. But perfection is just a way of us looking at something else and then needing to be just like that. Ideas of perfection permeate when we feel like we can't be ourselves, or we feel like we need to achieve a certain status or a certain level of perfection in order to be happy. This is the way that we look to an idea, we get inspired by it, and then we cling to it, and then we force ourselves to fit into the mold. And so perfection may show up for you in a lot of different ways. It might show up in your career and thinking that there's a status that you have to get to in your career before you can be happy. It might show up in the way that you consider yourself what a perfect parent looks like. It might be what your house looks like. It might be in the way you show up on social media and you're just like editing out parts of yourself in order to show up looking like you're perfect, basically. I think that when you are playing the perfectionist game, it really puts you in your head. For me, this is what it feels like. I feel, and to be honest, I have to put a lot less work into being when I get to be around my family and my close friends and people that don't make me feel like I have to be a certain way. But when I have to go to, like, say, a birthday party, or when I'm around people that I don't know very well, or I'm, put in a new social situation where I'm not familiar with the people around me, all of a sudden I start having to work at doing certain things in order to be liked and well received and all these things. I think that this is a very natural thing. I think that everybody goes through something like this, even if you're an extrovert. And the truth of it is that when we are out around people that we don't really know that well, there's always a level of a face that we put on. There's always a level, like a mask that we have on that is not the true us. And so that's how I feel like perfection is. I feel like perfection is putting yourself into a mold, and it requires tremendous energy and effort to keep up this face. And it leads us into a place where we're really probably stressed out. We don't have anything left to give. We're exhausted, but we keep telling ourselves, if I don't do this, I'm not going to be accepted. Or if I don't do this, I won't accept myself at a deeper level. And these are subconscious stories that go on, but that's how perfectionism works. That's how it feels. And the whole point to perfectionism isn't that you can't have a perfect image to inspire you. Of course you can, but we need to take a step back and ask ourselves, at the end of the day, can I allow this image to inspire me, but then also when I'm doing something, I let it flow through me, or I let myself do it in my own very own way that is true and authentic for me, and that doesn't bring about that added stress or the added energy that you don't really have to give in the first place. Okay, so that's the first thing, is perfection. And by the way, these are not in any specific order, but also the story can show up as comparison, and I have a lot to say on comparison. But comparison and perfection go hand in hand. We love to compare ourselves to others, and then comparing leads to perfection, doesn't it? In so many ways. But I will make the case that comparison does little to nothing for ourselves, and it's actually really detrimental. So either comparison leads to an elevated status of ourselves where we feel like we're above somebody else, and therefore it just feeds our egos, or it leads to a lower status that makes us feel horrible about ourselves, or that we can't be ourselves, or that, somebody's better than us and we're not as good, or we're inadequate. So this is the point where I'm going to point out the fact that social media in our culture today has the propensity to make us compare. So I don't know. I mean, and I don't know, because I, wasn't alive in the 20s or anything like that. So I don't really know. But looking on the outside, I think that it is much easier to fall into that comparison trap because social media is such a big integrated part of our lives right now. We do the comparison thing with like the clothes we wear, how much money we make, our house, our cars, with the people in our real lives. But social media is really, I think, where it happens. And I'm just going to get on my soapbox for a minute because I had this realization a while ago. But here's the thing, is if you're stalking anyone on social media, just stop. Don't do it. It's not healthy. I'm not perfect. I fall into that trap too, but it almost every single time, it leads you to one of two schools of thought. When I'm stalking somebody on Facebook or on Instagram or something like that, and you're like, you know what I'm talking about. You're just like looking for, ooh, I wonder what they're doing. And there's this deep-seated feeling of almost, I can't wait to get some juicy gossip out of it. You know what I mean? It's that kind of feeling. And when you go to their page and you're starting to look at what are they doing, what are they up to, it leads you to one of two things. It leads you to either say, oh, haha, I'm better than them. I make more money. My life looks better. You talk yourself into the fact that you're doing better than they are. Or two, you look at them and say, oh my gosh, they're better than me. And now I feel horrible about myself because I'm not doing as good. And really, we're just comparing. And I would say that this actually is worse with people that you actually know, like people that were, physically in your life than like influencers. But even influencers can be like that. Even social media, like Instagram influencers, if you're going to somebody's page and they're making you feel like crap about yourself, stop going to their page, mute them, unfollow them. If they're making you feel inadequate, if every time you go to somebody's page and you're just caught in this sinking feeling of comparison, we need to ask, like, is that healthy? And the truth is that it's not. So all that to say, okay, I'm off my soapbox now, but comparing yourself, social media stalking is never healthy. And I would stand by that. I do not think that it is healthy. So the thing is, when we're comparing ourselves, what we miss out completely in this cycle of comparison is the bigger picture. We're comparing external with external. We're comparing the things in our lives, like our house with somebody else's house. We're comparing what our kids look like to somebody else's kids, or our married life, or whatever that is, for you. We're comparing our careers or what trips we took with, our jobs. And I kind of talked about this in the perfectionist episode, but it's almost like with social media and with this comparison, we start to look at somebody else's vacation and then compare our workday to their vacation. And so it's not a fair assessment, because what really matters is your internal state. I could be living out of a box, but as long as I'm happy, and I'm not like asking anybody else for anything, like, isn't that the point of it? Isn't that the point of this life completely? I mean, it's not to accumulate stuff. It's to be happy and to spread your happiness to other people. And so anyway, we make all kinds of subconscious assumptions that are unhealthy, and then we use that to compare everything else. We assume that we're both at the same baseline. We assume that we have the same internal playing ground. And the truth is that your internal field, if you will, your experiences, your calling, all of the things that make you, like your spiritual nature, what you're supposed to do here on earth, all of those things don't compare to anybody else. Your path is unique, but when we get caught up in comparison, we ignore that completely. So here's a small reminder. Anyone can make their lives look like anything. Anyone can brand themselves. It's not that hard. You can lighten your photos. You can edit your photos. You can write out the most beautiful things. I personally know people who are like struggling on the inside, but their social media posts will make it look like they have every single thing together. And that's the truth. That's the world that we live in. Social media is such a trap for comparison, and we just need to let it go. And maybe, and this is just a little tangent, but maybe if you need to take a break or set boundaries with your social media, I highly recommend that. And actually, maybe I should do another episode on that. But we just allow whatever to come into our lives, make us feel awful about ourselves, make us believe that we are nothing, or that we should play small, or that we can't do it. And then it's just unhealthy. We don't put our vulnerabilities up online. We don't ask for help, because in our masculine society, that looks weak. We don't like that. And so we only put on the happy parts, the good parts, the pretty parts. That's where we see other people's lives, and that's what we compare ourselves to. So here is also the most important point of all. Anytime we compare ourselves to anybody else, we simultaneously dishonor our own path. Like, if you need a hard, real talk reason to not compare, to let go of comparison, you're telling yourself, you're telling the universe, the path that you have for me wasn't good enough. You're telling the universe, what I have that's not good enough. And let me be the first person to remind you that if you're listening to this podcast episode, you're probably listening to it on a phone. You're probably in the most affluent nation, one of the most affluent nations on earth. You live in a time where equality, even though we may have a long way to go, is better than it ever has been in the entire world. The fact that I'm a woman and I'm able to voice my own opinion, I mean, that doesn't happen in all societies. Even today, that doesn't happen. That didn't happen in the past. And so we are so extremely privileged. And instead of recognizing all that we have to be grateful for, we trap ourselves into being like, well, yeah, but I still don't have that. I still don't have this. And so maybe the antidote for comparison is to step into gratitude. I think that that's definitely one. And to understand, when you're caught in comparison, maybe start to become really mindful. And maybe even, and this is something that I've just started doing, is like, before you go on social media, have an intention about why you're going on social media. And that it really helps me to stop falling into that comparison cycle. Also, check in with yourself. Find out with yourself, how am I doing right now? What is my energy like? What is my mood like? And then when you start to get on social media and that all of a sudden starts to shift, then maybe you can identify that shift a little bit faster and figure out what that trigger was, because all of these things happen subconsciously and we don't even realize it. And then we'll get off social media, we'll put our phones away, and we'll be like, wow, I feel like crap. Now I have to rely on my attachments in order to make me feel better. So I'm going to talk about attachments in just a minute, but that's kind of what happened. Okay. The next thing that I have for you is needing approval or validation from others. This could be, I'm just going to continue with this social media thing because it's a huge deal, but this could be in the way that we seek numbers through social media, like likes, followers, all of these things. It could be in the way that we dress or organize or decorate our houses. If we're like looking for that external validation, if we are excited that maybe somebody would come over and be like, oh, wow, look at how beautiful your house is, right? That's the kind of thing when we're doing it to impress others. If you find yourself doing things or thinking to yourself, oh, if I do this, I am so excited to see what this person will think. Or, I mean, I think that, when you're doing something for somebody else or for the approval of somebody else. And to be honest, you can say, I'm not seeking approval from somebody else. I mean, I know a lot of people that are like, I don't care what other people think, but at the heart of it, the truth of it is that we do care what people think, because like I said, on an evolutionary level, group acceptance or acceptance into the group means that you got fed. We do seek approval from others, and we want approval from others. We do want to feel important and valued and wanted and like we belong. But the thing is, that in our world now, we get to pick. Here's the deal, you guys. We get to pick our tribe. We get to pick the people that we hang out with. We get to pick our friends. And while you may not pick your family that you were born into, you do get to pick who you spend most of your time around. And so I guess the middle way with this is not to say, well, I don't need approval or validation from others and I'm just going my authentic path and I don't care what anybody else thinks, because I don't think that's true. I don't think that you do care what people think. But the middle way is to come back to yourself and say, who am I seeking approval from? Who am I trying to impress? And is that person worth impressing? And the hard truth is that, a lot of people, maybe even myself included, like we've sought approval from our parents for so long. And maybe that's not the person that you need to impress anymore. All right. The next one is getting self-conscious, right? We get self-conscious when we either are comparing ourselves to others or are judging ourselves based on what others are thinking. If you own yourself, right? If you own everything you do, there's no reason to get self-conscious. The only reason you get self-conscious is if you feel like you shouldn't be doing what you're doing. If you think that you are wrong in some way or that was a stupid thing to do. And where do you think you get that idea from? It's the external world, right? And so going back to what I was talking about before, if we feel like we're putting on a face or pretending or being inauthentic, that can lead us to do or say things that are out of alignment. And then all of a sudden we start to judge ourselves. If we are in alignment, I don't believe that we have reason to judge ourselves. And so with this one, could we just own it? Could you own yourself? And I think that the antidote to self-consciousness is radical self-love. Being like, I'm enough. I am awesome. I am worthy. All of these things. And just living in your truth. When you live in your truth fully and completely and you know this is your path, you stop caring what other people think. You really do. You stop caring because here's the thing is that I just got done talking about how we care what other people think. And so maybe I don't mean to say that you stop caring what other people think, but you also become very aware of, if that person doesn't agree with me, then maybe that person's not my person, right? You start to have this discretion about you where when somebody judges you for doing your own thing and you know that that's true and authentic to you and somebody else is trying to put you into a box, it becomes easier and easier for you to withdraw your energy from them and say, okay, well, maybe you're not my person. If you're trying to put me into a box, I don't want to hang out with you. You get what I mean? And so I think it just gets easier and easier as we go. And it just comes down to radical self-love. So the next one I have is seeking advice or looking for answers. This is kind of another tricky one because we do seek advice from others. We do look to the external world for validation. I seek my answers a lot of times in books, in podcasts, in YouTube videos, in people who are talking about spiritual things. I go to my friends. I ask for advice. I say, I'm having this problem. What do you think? You weigh the opinions of others. And so I think that the thing with this is that you can look to advice or look to answers from others, but you always have to come back home to yourself first. You always have to say, is this true for me? So even like this podcast, I can't tell you, don't listen to anybody, right? I'm obviously giving advice. But what I think that it's important for all of us to do is always to come back to ourselves and say, okay, but that might not be true for me. You have to figure out what resonates and be able to say, I disagree with that, or that doesn't jive with me, and that's not really my thing, but it could be for somebody else, and that's fine too. The problem with this one is that when we seek advice, or when we intake information and we don't question it and we just assume that it's gospel because somebody said it, even if it's somebody that you highly respect, that's like what will put us into an unconscious, unhealthy ego story. But if we can always come back to ourselves and say, who is your ultimate authority? It needs to be you. I think that that's, if I could wrap that up into one phrase, you need to be your ultimate authority. Okay, and this last one that I have is that our unhealthy egos will start to form attachments. And this is something that I have unpacked and dove into 1,000 times over, and I'm really curious about it. And it's something that shows up in my life quite often. And so with attachments, it's not so much that we are looking to our attachments for answers, but we are looking for our attachments to provide some sort of self-soothing, some sort of comfort where we could be growing and learning through the process. So by attachments, what I mean really are low-level addictions. And I have to be careful here because I am not in any way saying that like my addiction to productivity is anywhere close to like a hardcore drug addiction. And I just want to respect the fact that there are different levels of addiction. And so I have to be very careful with that word. However, I think that all of us have addictions or an attachment in some form or fashion. So think about, what do you do when you are uncomfortable? What do you turn to provide you comfort? So like maybe you're feeling inadequate, maybe you're feeling bored or you're stressed, maybe you're feeling overwhelmed or even like understimulated, right? Maybe you got off of social media and now you feel awful about your life because you're caught in the comparison cycle. What do you do in those moments that make you feel better? Is it a distraction? Do you watch TV? Do you turn to shopping on your phone maybe? Do you eat? Is it alcohol, sex, social media? Do you go to more social media? And equally, it could also be seemingly healthy things that I think can become detrimental if you're using it to cover up pain. So I've talked about a little bit about how I feel like I'm addicted to productivity. So the thing is that I internalized a message in my childhood that was something like, if you're not productive, you are not contributing. And if you're not contributing, you are not worthy of love or all the things that you need to survive. And that wasn't explicit. It was just something that I picked up from my environment. And now when I feel that I don't have a productive day, I feel unworthy or inadequate. And that might be a story that a lot of us tell ourselves. So I get really attached to doing things just to do them. And the same way, I think that we could also get attached to self-help. We get attached to podcasts or, like I said, YouTube, audiobooks, books that are self-help because we're seeking some kind of self-soothing, we're seeking some kind of comfort when we feel uncomfortable. And anything can be healthy or unhealthy. But I think that the difference with this is that if it's unhealthy, you're usually trying to cover up some kind of pain. You're usually trying to numb out in some way. There's a very big difference between drinking a glass of wine because you want to enjoy this bottle of wine or because you're celebrating versus drinking wine because you're stressed out at the end of the day or because you're overwhelmed and you just want to shut your brain off so that you can sleep. In the same way, you can shop because you really want something, or you can shop because you're numbing out or you're trying to get a dopamine hit because you feel bored or something like that. Anyway, I have so many things to say about attachments. I think I could probably do another episode on that. But the thing with attachments is that you're giving your power away to something outside of you. What you could do is work through it, find what's at the bottom of that attachment, try to heal it, use it to grow. But instead, if we're leaning on our attachments to make it better, like just for now, then we're missing out. We're missing out on opportunities for growth. I believe that it's within our darkest moments that we find our greatest opportunities for growth. But if we're numbing out and we're turning to our attachments, then we lose that ability to grow through it. And so, like I said, I have a ton of things to say about attachments. I could go on and on, but I think that if you come back down to the root, like check in with yourself. That's like the key to all of this is check in with yourself before, often, early and often. Figure out, what am I feeling right now? Is it uncomfortable? And am I numbing out, or am I using this for or to numb out? And could I do something a little bit healthier? Or am I in a celebratory mood? Or am I in a good mood where I am happy and I want to experience or expand upon this happiness and enjoy this bottle of wine, or really sink into and be mindful about this delicious food instead of numbing out? So all of those are ways that your ego looks to the external world or the external environment for answers or validations. I hope that has helped bring some awareness to some of these things that we sort of do that we don't really think about on a day-to-day basis. And if you find yourself in any one of these comparison, perfection, looking to the world for answers kind of cycles or states, maybe we can use these things to our advantage instead of falling into them and becoming a victim to them. So that is what I have for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope that you are enjoying your day wherever you are, and I will talk to you next time. If you enjoyed this episode, I would invite you to subscribe, share it with someone you know, and leave an honest rating or review. You can also connect with me through Instagram at spiritmind.body, through YouTube, or my website. Links to all of these can be found in the show notes below. This work is not easy and requires tremendous self-reflection, grit, and a willingness to be misunderstood, and for that, I honor every single one of you for showing up for your authentic self. Until next time.